Hey there, welcome to Cult Life first live stream. I thought I'd do this first live stream for the show. There were a lot of questions that many people asked me, so I thought I'd do this just to give a little bit more background about myself and talk about upcoming things for the channel, what we're trying to achieve with this channel, and going forward what we want to do with the channel. So glad you could join me. Sorry, I've got a bit of a frog in the throat, so excuse me. But glad you could join me. As I said, this live stream is the first live stream for the show, the channel. So two things. There's a few questions. I asked people to just send me their questions, and and I'll answer them. There were a few questions that came through from various platforms. And then there's also later on in this live stream, I'm launching a course, how cults work course, but we'll talk about that towards the end of the live stream. We'll talk a little bit about that. So I thought I'd address one of the first question that came up from viewers was, what was it like growing up as a Jehovah's Witness in apartheid South Africa? Now, those of you who don't know and who's watching this stream for the first time and watching the channel for the first time, I'm from South Africa. I was born and raised in the Eastern Cape, in a town called Uitenhage in the Eastern Cape, and grew up a Jehovah's Witness, got baptized at the age of 13, and subsequently grew up in the faith, and eventually left in 2004, I think it was 2004. Wrote 2 books, and became an activist after I left the faith. And what was very interesting, now the first question was, what was it like growing up a Jehovah's Witness in apartheid South Africa? Now we all know that South Africa was segregated, was a segregated country, and the different ethnic groups, the different races lived in different and separate communities. So as a Jehovah's Witness, we, kingdom halls were built in those communities, and of course we had to attend meetings and go from house to house and door to door in those different communities, in those specific communities. But the white government and, the white brothers and sisters were able to come into our kingdom halls and take up positions of authority as elders, presiding overseers, and circuit overseers, or whatever the case may be, in the different kingdom halls in the segregated communities. So yes, we were segregated. The only time that we could congregate, come together as Jehovah's Witnesses was when we had the big conventions, or assemblies as we used to call them back then. So that was one of the few times that we could actually associate with the different races, in South Africa as Jehovah's Witnesses. But one thing that a lot of people don't realize as well, that the white brothers, South Africa had a legislation geared toward conscription for white brothers that were 18 years and older. So they had to go to the army, the military, to get their military training and spend 2 years in the military. This was the conscription. And of course, Jehovah's Witnesses were seen as classified as conscientious objectors at the time. So a lot of these white brothers and sisters had to go, refused to take part in military service, and they were eventually put in what they call detention barracks. And the treatment that they endured in these detention barracks was actually appalling. The the government, although these were white brothers, the apartheid government treated them poorly because of their stance against military and conscription service. Some of them were beaten, some of them were, dehumanized, some were left to sleep in their underwear in the winter months, and South Africa can get, some areas can get pretty cold and freezing cold. So it was quite harsh on these Jehovah's Witnesses, these brothers, 18 years and older. So a lot of them had to go into detention barracks and spend time there. So, and then the other question was, are the witnesses growing or stagnating in South Africa? Well, I think it's stagnating, or I haven't checked the stats lately, but I wouldn't say that there's a tremendous amount of growth in South Africa when it comes to Jehovah's Witnesses. And I'll relate my personal experience with the kingdom walls that I used to associate with and what I see currently happening. So the kingdom wall that I associated with originally in the Eastern Cape when I grew up, now at the height of and I'm talking about the 1980s, 1990s, at the height of the growth that was happening in Jehovah's Witnesses in South Africa at the time, we would see, actually, I was part of the congregation. We built a kingdom wall that had the capacity, and it has a capacity to house 200 people, congregants. And we built that hall. Brothers gave up their time on weekends, spent their time building that hall, Saturdays and Sundays. Of course, all free. And it was hard, man. We really built, because this was brick and mortar kingdom walls, that kingdom wall that we built. But during the 1980s and the early 90s, there was a steady growth in South Africa when it came to Jehovah's Witnesses. And the reason why I say that, and you could include the 1970s as well, it was because of the oppression that was the apartheid government, the oppression that a lot of brothers and sisters and the communities and people in South Africa had to endure. So the witnesses came with this message of hope, and there'll be a time when you don't have to endure all of this oppression, paradise earth. So the message resonated with people, and the growth was quite tremendous. And I remember at the height of I think we averaged sometimes at the Kingdom Hall, I think the most we averaged at one meeting, I'll never forget this, was about 200 attendees, for a Sunday watchtower talk and watchtower study. So the growth during the 70s, 80s, and 90s was quite tremendous during that time period. But there's been a steady decline and I'm talking about, if I look at that congregation, and I was down in my hometown recently, and I drove past the Kingdom Wall, and I know, meetings were now held in Zoom meetings because of the pandemic, but this was a trend that I saw happening at that very same Kingdom Hall, was that the attendance and there was a steady decline year on year of people attending meetings at that hall. And I stand to be corrected, but I think the most that they could muster in terms of attendance right now at the Kingdom Hall, at that one, is about 30 people, 30 to 40 people. So compared to, the attendance we used to have in the 80s and the 90s, where we averaged 200, sometimes 150, average 150. But it's been on the decline because, it's the old guard, the old elderly people that are still hanging on. Some of them have left. The youngsters have all moved out. Many have left the area. Many have left the organization. And don't subscribe to it anymore. I think, and we all know that The internet has become a thorn in the side of the organization, the Jehovah's Witnesses. So yes, I think the growth is not as it used to be. There's been a steady decline, but I should actually check the figures and the yearbook figures, and I'd like to get that number. And one of the other questions that I always get is, what is the one thing you take away from your time as a Jehovah's Witness? And I always say this, there's two things. One was the sense of community, and anybody that attends church and goes to religious meetings and stuff like that would always say there's a strong sense of community when it comes to religious gatherings, and that's the one thing I take away from that, because it was a community, be it a closed community, but it was a community. And then the other thing is, they taught me how to speak publicly. So, and eventually when I left, I used that as you would say, when I became an apostate, I used that to speak out against the organization and its practices. So they taught me how to speak on a public platform, which was one of the other things I took away. And many people would say that, that's the one thing you take away from, because they groom you from a young age to be able to speak on a platform and in front of multitudes of people. So the other thing I want to address is just a little bit in between about my activism and after I left the Witnesses here in South Africa in 2004. I published my first book called Losing the Faith in 2005. And nobody had done it at the time, in terms of speaking out against the organization in South Africa as vocal as I did it, and published the book. And of course, we all know the consequences. I lost family and friends in the organization, instantly cut off, the shunning. But what actually happened was that after the publication of my first book and subsequently the second book, I started being interviewed on a lot of television and radio stations in South Africa, some locally in South Africa and some internationally. Carte Blanche comes to mind, one of the current affairs programs here. I was on African Views, I was on radio shows. And interestingly enough, I actually held a slot on a Islamic radio station every Wednesday. I was asked to be, I think it was between 5 and 6, I had a slot explaining the cult dynamic. Now, people would say, Islamic radio station, cult, but what I always try and tell people, that you find the cults in the different mainstream religions. You have the different mainstream religions like Christianity, Islam, and so forth, Hinduism, and so forth, Buddhism. But within those mainstream religions, you do find these breakaway little sects that spring up and use that as a base. And when it comes to Islam, we can all know Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram. Those are all sects and which are cults within the Islamic community and the religion. Same with Christianity, same with some of the with the Hindu faith and Buddhism as well. So they use that as their base, and that becomes, they use that as their base, and that becomes their overall tenet in terms of drawing people in. But then, of course, they manipulate people towards their own. The leaders manipulate people towards their own means and gains. So, in terms of appear on radio and television. So at the time, I actually became very well known in the media as one who would be, approached to speak about cults and to give my viewpoints on organizations, different groups in the country. I also got a lot of calls from people who called in and said, listen, my son or my daughter is involved with such and such a group. Is this a cult? This doesn't sound kosher. How can we get them out? And that type of thing. So subsequently, I got involved in a lot of awareness campaigns and blogging and carrying on in terms of my activism. And an interesting thing that happened here, one of the biggest things I got involved with in terms of the anti-cult movements, was a group of concerned parents here in, I'm currently based in Durban, South Africa, and a cult, the Grace, I'll name it because it's called the Grace Gospel Church, was recruiting youngsters, young people at high school, at one of the high schools. We're targeting the high schools in the upper highway area. Now, the upper highway area in Durban is a very affluent community, very affluent area. So this cult or this church was targeting youngsters, teenagers in those high schools around there, and drawing them into this church and group, and subsequently, eventually breaking families up, shipping them off to Mauritius, because the cult headquarters was based in Mauritius. Some of them got shipped off to Mauritius and cut ties with the parents and with the family at large. And I was eventually called in to assist and to give my views and to support the concerned parents group, because they eventually formed a concerned parents group, and subsequently, tried to expose this group in the media and try to get some of the kids back out and back into their back to South Africa as well. So it was tragic. It was heartbreaking, because the modus, when I was listening to the stories, it reminded me so much of some of the tactics of how Jehovah's Witnesses recruit, and how they the tactics they use in terms of the shunning, the us versus them mentality and so forth. So I became quite involved in that concerned parents group, which was quite an interesting dynamic. But apart from that, South Africa has seen over the years a steady increase in cult activity in little churches and groups springing up all over the place, and becoming, some being very deadly, because we had an incident a few years ago where a group in the Eastern Cape, Transkei, there was a cult there. I think it was called the Seven Angels cult, and they ended up, it was quite prominent on the news here and in the media. There was a shootout with police and so forth, and some of the members got killed, some of the leaders got killed as well during the standoff with police in the Eastern Cape. So cult activity in South Africa is quite rife, and it's one of the reasons why I continue to do this in terms of educating. That's the reason why I started this channel originally. Yes, focusing much on Jehovah's Witnesses, but also giving a broader picture on the similarities with a lot of these groups, and how they operate, and how they draw people in, how they recruit, and so forth. So that was one of the reasons. So the channel was started originally for that. And a lot of people would say that, when you leave a high control group, it's because of the shunning. Your family, you get cut off from family and friends instantly, whether you disfellowship, excommunicated, or you leave voluntarily. The consequence is always the same in terms of shunning, to the point that some people, because they fend for themselves, and depression sets in, and of course this causes mental health issues, further mental health issues, to the point that some people actually commit suicide. So I always encourage people, when it comes to leaving cults and exiting these these groups, it's always a good thing to find a supportive community of people, who you can join and speak to about this. Get counseling, get help, professional help, because it's like, leaving a former life behind and starting anew, starting fresh, and it can be very traumatic for some. And one of the reasons why I actually, a lot of people ask me, why don't I just, I've left the Jehovah's Witnesses and it's time to move on, leave them behind. And yes, there's a sense of that, why don't I just carry on and just let it be? But there's too many people that are getting hurt from organizations like the Jehovah's Witnesses. And we all know that Jehovah's Witnesses, one of the big thing that always gets him in news is, of course, the blood transfusion issue. That's one of the big things. So people, families are being hurt by their, and I'll call it their stupid interpretation of Bible verses when it comes to blood transfusions. So people's families are really, really needlessly, broken up, and people die needlessly because of an ideology that has no basis, or a doctrine that has absolutely no scriptural basis at all whatsoever. And then, of course, what's recently come to light, and what has let Jehovah's Witnesses into the spotlight quite a bit now, is the child sexual abuse issues. And this has been a major one. And I remember when I was still a Jehovah's Witness, the Watchtower would always point to the Catholic Church to see, when it came to issues of child sexual abuse, and point to the priests, and even to the point that they would write articles in their publications, in the Watchtower magazines, pointing fingers at the Catholic Church and the other churches for their child sexual abuse problems. But little did we know how rife the problem was within the organization itself. And now that this has all come to light, we actually see how big it is. It's on a worldwide scale. And South Africa, we don't hear much of it here, but I can guarantee you there are issues here that have been covered up. I'm trying to get more South Africans. So if there's any other South Africans watching this, I'm trying to get more South Africans on the show to speak up about their journeys. I know plenty of Jehovah's Witnesses have left, and we need to speak up about this, the hurt that this organization causes. Now, South Africa, and I had this discussion on another podcast recently about, when it comes to religion, in many countries, and especially South Africa, because we're such a diverse community in terms of, culture and ethnics and religions. We're such a diverse nation, and it's seen as taboo when you speak about people's religion, and it's wrong. We need to, when something happens where in a group where people are getting hurt, we need to talk about it, and we need to speak up about those issues. Because if everything just gets brushed under the carpet, these problems, these sexual abuse issues, just keeps on being perpetuated year after year after year. And that's one of the reasons why I speak out, because of things like that. Because the hypocrisy in that organization is just totally off the charts, mind-blowing. And the Watchtower has now become, they've put themselves out there on the internet with their JW broadcasting platform. And they actually give people like us fodder in terms of, to show how hypocritical the organization is, and how the doctrinal flip-flops that have happened over time, and how this has hurt people. And there's been many documentaries recently that's come to light. So yeah, that's one of the reasons. So with that being said, Over the years, with my activism and my releasing 2 books, and people constantly talking and asking me, listen, how do we protect ourselves from getting drawn into organizations like this, cults, high control groups? um, you know um, is there a way that we can protect ourselves? What do we need to look out for? You've been in an organization like that. Tell us about the manipulation, the recruitment techniques, and how to do it. And I held off. Wrote the second book because, it's called Cults, How They Work, and I thought I wrote that. But there's been this constant stream of people who don't only want to read the book, but want to go through material, that's easily accessible on their laptops, on their phones, wherever they are. And some people like to, excuse me, listen or watch videos rather than sit and watch a book, because look, let's face it, we're all busy people, and on our commutes, sometimes we'd like to watch videos like we watch our YouTube videos and listen to podcasts. So with that in mind, I eventually decided that, look, I'll put together a course, and it's called How Cults Work course. And in this course, I actually speak about my experience in the Jehovah's Witnesses, the subsequent effects it had on me, my activism, my interactions with others who've come out of similar high control groups here in South Africa, and so forth. And what are the types of cults that we find in South Africa? Now, many people would be surprised to find out that cults are not only religious in nature. Cults, the religious cults, are the ones that everybody speaks about and is aware of, and so forth. But they're not only religious in nature. I speak about political cults as well, and I always use the example of a political cult on a large scale was Nazi Germany. Stalin's USSR, Stalin's Russia. That was a political cult, a cult of personality. So political cults, and we still find political cults today. And I know Steve Hassan recently wrote the book called The Cult of Trump. It's to show you how politics and a character and a figure can become such a cult figure in a political sense, that people are blind to, I always use cognitive dissonance sets in when the wrongdoings and and all the flip-flops, the doctrinal issues, and the hypocrisy gets exposed to them about some leader. They're political in nature, they're religious in nature, they self-help in nature, they are multi-level marketing in nature. One of the commercial cult, many multi-level marketing companies operate exactly like a cult. And I was watching a very interesting video exchange between Steve Hassan and a former commercial multi-level marketing cult member, and where they speak about how similar the tactics are, the recruitment techniques are, the methods of control are, within all of these different cult, the different types of cults. The tactics are the same, the recruitment techniques are the same, the methods of control are the same. How they keep people in, how they draw them in, are similar in nature. And one of the big things, and I'll be talking to a former South African Kwasiza Bantu cult member on the forthcoming show. One of the big exposés that has happened here in South Africa recently is the Kwasiza Bantu mission cult here in KZN. And that's come to light recently, and how similar I had a brief discussion with Erica a few days ago. We were talking about how similar the modus of operandi, and how the modus of operation is with regards to Kwasiza Bantu and the Jehovah's Witnesses, the controlled women, the sexual abuse cover-ups, and all of those. So, but we'll very interesting discussion coming up with Erica on the show, Erica Boardman. So one of the reasons why I decided to do this was because, I needed to put something out there because of all the requests from people. So with that, in the show notes, I am putting a link to the course. It's a pre-launch. It's a pre-launch of the course, and it's if you sign up now, the course will only be available towards the end of November. But if you sign up now, there's of course a discount, because for the next 10 days. If you sign up now, you'll get the discounted price on the course. So check in the show notes, and you can get more information on the page. But I think it's important, and people ask me, in terms of educating people about these types of groups, it's important that we keep this going. And South Africa is a country at the tip of Africa, and many a times we focus on what's happening in the US, what's happening in the UK, in terms of all these groups, and many of these big high control groups and mainstream cults, and like Scientology, all originate in the United States, but they have such a worldwide reach, and their tentacles reach across the globe, into major countries. And it's important that we expose them in each of the countries where they are actually operating, and tell people to be cautious of this, and just to be careful to protect their kids from getting drawn into these types of cults. Which was interesting. Just before COVID hit, I've never seen Scientology, in South Africa, actually actively recruit. And the one day in one of our shopping centers here in Durban, this was before COVID, they had a stand selling Dianetics books, L. Ron Hubbard's Dianetics books. But of course, a lot of people don't know that it's actually a Scientology recruitment technique. So yes, they had the books placed out there, and I must admit there were quite a few people standing around the table, very interested in Dianetics and so forth. But a lot of people don't know that it's actually a Scientology recruitment technique or tactic that was actually employed over there. So yeah, people need to be aware of this. And I always say South Africa, people are more interested in celebrity gossip than actually educating themselves in when it comes to things like this. And people get drawn into all sorts of churches here, and then later on find out that, man, I was fleeced, or this guy was a charlatan and took all the money and ran, and so forth. So it's important that I keep this channel going, and I want I appreciate your support, those of you viewing this, and I want to grow this channel exponentially over the next few months, because I think there's a greater need and awareness that needs to happen The South African stories need to be told, and the African stories need to be told just as much as, the stories in other countries. So that's why I need to keep this channel going. So I'd appreciate all the assistance that you can give when it comes to supporting this channel and making it better, in terms of going forward, so that the awareness can be kept up there. So interesting, that we've heard now that Jehovah's Witnesses are going back to the Kingdom Halls now that I think vaccinations are taking place. South Africa has also rolled out quite an extensive vaccination program. So I think, the Zoom meetings will become a thing of the past again. I think they're only piloting certain areas. And I think the requirement is that you are vaccinated before you can attend a Kingdom Hall, a meeting at a Kingdom Hall again. So, that remains to be seen how this will pan out, especially here in South Africa. When people are now allowed to go back to the Kingdom Hall, because I think. The pandemic has hurt them a little bit in terms of donations, money that was regularly coming in, at the Kingdom Halls. But of course, Jehovah's Witnesses always make a plan in terms of electronic donations. So, I think it'll be interesting to see the effects of returning back to the Kingdom Halls will have on the organization. Worldwide, but not only worldwide, but also here in South Africa. Because I think the pandemic and staying at home and people going on to Zoom has given some people a bit of time to think, of what they are involved in. So it would remain to be, it would be very interesting to see if some people would actually go back to the Kingdom Halls again. That's going to be a very interesting dynamic. One thing that I want to say is when I passed my old Kingdom Hall in my hometown recently, I went past there and it was with a sense of, I stopped in front of the hall and I stood there. It was the sense of sadness that I looked at that place and thought to myself, people gave up their time to build this Kingdom Hall. And because of the downturn in attendance, I think pretty soon that Kingdom Hall will be sold because, I don't see it lasting another 2 years or so because the attendance at that Kingdom Hall is very, very minimal. It's situated in a community that is... I wouldn't say not very affluent, and people are struggling to make ends meet, and I don't think donations are coming in as it used to. So I would be surprised if that Kingdom Hall is not sold within the next 2 years. And what's going to be very interesting is, and why I felt a sense of sadness, because people spent their hard-earned money. When that Kingdom Hall is sold, like what's happened worldwide with Kingdom Halls are sold, all that money goes back into the Watchtower's coffers. And that's the sad part, because the brothers and sisters and the rank and file who spent their hard-earned money donating and keeping up the repayments of the initial loans that was taken from the Watchtower Society to build some of these halls, they won't see the benefit of that because everything goes back into the Watchtower coffers, and that's the sad part. I was actually, overcome with quite a sense of, because people grew old, in that Kingdom Hall. And I think this is the trend worldwide, it's a trend that's happening worldwide. It's just Watchtower's control over the rank and file, and that's how it is. So interestingly, and I think that's going to happen with a lot of Kingdom Halls in our communities, in our communities in South Africa where people are not that affluent, and donations, and COVID has hit everybody hard. Donations haven't been coming in like they used to. People have lost their jobs. People are struggling to make ends meet. As Toni Morris says, these people are on the poor scale, on the poor scale, but they're still forced and manipulated to contribute to the Watchtower Society, a billion-dollar corporation. It's sad. It's sad. But yeah, it'll take a while for the demise of the Watchtower. There's a decline worldwide in terms of numbers. That's for sure. It's only people who are getting baptized are only, family members of generations, youngsters getting baptized. There's very little new people coming in to the organization as far as I can see. Here in South Africa, there's very little few. There are more people leaving than what are coming in. I sound like Stephen Lett when I say that. But yeah, I think there's an exodus happening amongst the Jehovah's Witnesses here in South Africa, and the trend is worldwide, of course. So it remains to be seen. But they've used the pandemic as a fear-mongering tool again. Armageddon's coming soon. Every event like this, like the pandemic, is always used as a fear-mongering tool to say it's the end. Armageddon soon. We're living in the end times, in the last of the last of the last days. They always use something, get something to try and keep people in, instill the fear, keep them in, and to draw new people into the organization as well. So that's my little rant on this live stream for today. Those of you, I'm glad you could join. As I said, I answered a few questions, but of course I just wanted to release, after years and years and years of people asking me, how do we protect ourselves from getting drawn into these types of organizations? I eventually decided to make a course available that will help people, those who want to understand the cult mentality and the cult and the inner workings of cults, how they work, how they recruit, the types of cults, and what do we need to do when we have loved ones in, or friends or family, and how to encourage them to leave and so forth. So in the notes down below, the link is there. You can click the link and go through and check it out. It's a pre-launch. It's a special, I'm releasing it as a special for the first 10 days at that price. I think it's $55 if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's $55 for the course. It'll be very interesting. I know some of you love the content I put out on this channel. I want to keep this channel going. I want to keep on educating people about this. So I'm appreciative, of people who actually take up and support the channel and support all my efforts to educate people in terms of cults and high control groups going forward. So with that, I'm going to leave the live stream. Thank you. This live stream will be up for people to watch. So feel free to comment, in the comment section as well. If you didn't watch the live stream live, but I'd love to hear your comments. Let's keep the going. I'd love to hear your views on all of these issues as well all the time. It's very interesting. I love that. So yeah, thank you for joining me, and until next time, bye for now.